His own mother warned me he was a cheater, but I thought my love could change him. He threw away his marriage for a younger woman who loved his money. When he finally betrayed me, he ran to his mama for help. You won't believe the brutal truth, she told him. Like this video, and right where you are watching us from, we will be happy to send you our regards. The silence in our Philadelphia apartment had a sound. It was the low hum of the refrigerator, the distant wail of a siren bleeding through the double-paned glass, and the almost imperceptible tap, tap, tap of my husband Terrence's thumb on his phone screen. 2 years ago, this same silence would have been a comfortable blanket, a testament to a couple so in sync they didn't need words. Now, it was a weapon. It was a cold, heavy presence that sat between us on our expensive leather sofa, a ghost of the love we used to have. The apartment, a high-rise symbol of our shared success with sweeping views of the city skyline, had begun to feel less like a home and more like a beautifully decorated waiting room for the end of our marriage. Terrence used to look at me like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. Now, his gaze slid over me as if I were part of the furniture, useful, familiar, but ultimately unremarkable. He was a man slowly unplugging himself from our life together, chord by chord, and he thought I didn't notice. But a woman always knows. We're detectives of the heart, trained to spot the subtle shifts in atmosphere, the micro-expressions that betray a lie, the spaces where laughter used to be. The question was never if he was cheating, but when he would get sloppy enough to make it obvious. And more importantly, what I would do when that day came. Tonight was a Tuesday. He'd come home late, again, smelling of the generic soap from his office gym and a faint, cloying trace of a perfume that wasn't mine. He'd offered a clipped, "Hey," dropped his briefcase by the door, and retreated to his side of the sofa, his phone immediately becoming a shield. I watched him from the corner of my eye as I pretended to read my book. His face, once an open, expressive landscape I could read with ease, was now a locked door. But I could see the faint smile playing on his lips as he texted, a secret smile that was never, ever for me anymore. A dull, familiar ache pulsed in my chest, the pain of being rendered invisible in your own life. But something else was blooming in the shadow of that pain, a cold, hard resolve. If he thought I was going to crumble, he had severely underestimated the woman he married. I was not the type to beg for scraps of affection from a table where I used to be the feast. If our marriage was a house and he was busy loosening the foundations, I wasn't going to cry and plead for him to stop. I was going to quietly pack my valuables and find the nearest exit, but not before I made sure I had the deed in my hand. He thought I was sitting here reading a novel. In reality, I was plotting a strategy, because the end was coming, and I intended to walk away from the wreckage, not be buried under it. It wasn't always this cold. I remember the man I married, or at least the man I thought I was marrying. Terrence was a force of nature when he walked into a room. He had a laugh that could make you forget your troubles, and a charisma that pulled people into his orbit like planets around the sun. He was a successful financial analyst, ambitious and driven, and he pursued me with a single-minded intensity that was both flattering and intoxicating. He made me feel like the center of his universe. Our courtship was a whirlwind of fine dining, surprise weekend trips, and late-night talks where he mapped out our future together in bright, dazzling colors. He promised me a partnership, a life built by two equals, a love that would be our fortress against the world. And I, a woman who had always been pragmatic and cautious, allowed myself to believe him. His mother, however, was not so easily charmed. Miss Evelyn was a woman carved from oak, strong, wise, and unyielding. She saw the world with eyes that missed nothing. I met her at a family barbecue a few months into our relationship. She watched me with a quiet, assessing gaze as I navigated the boisterous sea of his relatives. Later, while we were cleaning up in the kitchen, she turned to me, her hands busy washing a large platter, and said, her voice low but clear, "You're a good woman, Sana. You've got a good head on your shoulders and a kind heart. I can see that." She'd paused, rinsing the dish with deliberate care before meeting my eyes. "That boy of mine," she'd continued, "he loves the chase. He loves the shine of new things. But he's got a wandering eye and a short memory when it comes to the work it takes to keep something beautiful. You be sure you're not trying to make a home in a house with no foundation. I'd been taken aback by her frankness, but I respected it. I smiled and assured her, I think our love is the foundation, Miss Evelyn. She had simply nodded, her expression unreadable. I hope you're right, child. For your sake. I truly do. Her words were a warning, a red flag planted by the one person who knew him best. But I was in love. I saw her caution as the natural protectiveness of a mother, not as an accurate character assessment. I believed our love was different. I believed I was the woman who could finally make him want to stay home. It's a classic, foolish story, isn't it? The story of a woman who thinks her love is a magic potion that can transform a frog into a prince. I had poured all my magic into him, and for a while it seemed to be working. We built this beautiful life, this home in the sky. I just didn't realize the foundation wasn't our love at all. It was his ambition, and he was the only one who held the blueprints. The shift was gradual at first, a slow erosion of intimacy. Late nights at the office became more frequent. Business trips started to include weekends. The shared jokes and easy affection that had been the bedrock of our marriage were replaced by polite, distant courtesies. He stopped asking about my day, his eyes glazing over when I spoke about my work as an architectural historian. I was becoming a footnote in the story of his life, a story he was now clearly writing with a new co-author. The final, definitive proof came last Friday. He told me he was flying to Chicago for a 2-day conference. I was at the Reading Terminal Market on Saturday afternoon picking up some fresh produce when I saw him. He was across the bustling hall, standing by a stall selling artisanal cheeses. He wasn't alone. He was with a woman, younger, with long, flashy red hair and a laugh that was far too loud. His hand was resting on the small of her back, a gesture of casual, confident intimacy that sent a shard of ice straight through my heart. He was looking at her with that same intense, all-consuming focus he had once reserved for me. The prodigal gaze had found a new home. I didn't make a scene. I didn't storm over there and demand an explanation. My feet felt rooted to the floor, the bag of groceries suddenly weighing 1,000 pounds. I simply watched them for a moment, a scientist observing a painful truth through a microscope. They were a cliché, a walking, talking embodiment of my husband's mid-level crisis and my failing marriage. I turned, my movements stiff and robotic, and walked out of the market, leaving my groceries behind. The pain was immense, a physical blow that knocked the wind out of me. But as I walked the crowded Philadelphia streets, the pain began to crystallize into something else. It was clarity, a cold, hard, diamond-sharp clarity. Hope was dead. The dream was over. There would be no saving this marriage, no fixing what was broken. Terrence had made his choice. And in that moment, so did I. I would not be the weeping, hysterical wife. I would not be the woman left destitute and confused. I had invested 2 years of my life, my love, and my support into this man and this marriage. His infidelity was not just a betrayal of my heart. It was a breach of contract. Crying was a luxury I couldn't afford. The time for emotion was over. It was time to prepare for war. He was about to come home to the woman he thought was a placid lamb, completely unaware that she had already started sharpening her teeth. He had no idea that his casual betrayal was about to run headfirst into a wall of cold, calculated preparation. He had started the fire, but I was the one who was going to control the burn. The foundation is cracked and the betrayal is confirmed. Sana now knows the truth, but instead of breaking, she's building a fortress. Terrence thinks he's in control, but he's about to learn a devastating lesson about the woman he underestimated. Stay with us because the next chapter reveals the first secret step Sana takes to ensure she's the one who walks away from the rubble with her head held high. You won't want to miss it. The weekend after I saw Terrence at the market was a masterful performance. I was the epitome of the dutiful, unassuming wife. I made his favorite brunch on Sunday, shrimp and grits with a side of skillet cornbread. I asked about his conference in Chicago. listening with serene, detached interest as he spun a web of lies about keynote speakers and networking events. I was a placid lake, reflecting the calm blue sky, giving no hint of the monstrous leviathan of rage and resolve circling in the depths. My tranquility was a strategy. A weeping, suspicious wife would have put him on guard. A calm, seemingly oblivious one made him comfortable, and a comfortable man is a careless man. He mistook my silence for submission. He had no idea it was the quiet concentration of a sniper lining up a perfect shot. On Monday morning, I watched him get ready for work. He stood before the vast walk-in closet we designed together, selecting one of his expensive, tailor-made suits. He was a man who wore his success like a second skin, and he believed he had earned it all himself. He saw me as a beautiful accessory to that success, not the partner who had managed our home, hosted his work dinners, and offered the quiet, stable support that allowed him to focus solely on his career. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the true definition of partnership, and I was going to be the one to teach it. As soon as the door clicked shut behind him, the placid lake in me receded, revealing the bedrock of purpose beneath. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I went to my laptop, and with the precision of the historian I was, I began my research. I wasn't looking up signs of a cheating husband or reading sad stories on internet forums. I was searching for the best divorce attorney in Philadelphia. I wasn't looking for a mediator or a counselor. I was looking for a warrior. My search led me to one name that appeared again and again, recommended in legal journals and praised in fierce testimonials: Brenda Harrison. Her online profile described her as a specialist in complex asset division, and a photo showed a sharp, intelligent-looking Black woman in her 50s with eyes that radiated a no-nonsense authority. She was known as the Lioness in family court circles. She was perfect. I used a burner app on my phone to make the call, my voice steady and clear. I took a personal day from my part-time curating job at the university, citing a sudden migraine. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was sitting in the plush waiting room of Harrison and Associates, a law firm housed in a sleek downtown skyscraper not far from my own apartment building. The air in the office was different. It was the air of power, of consequence, of women who took chaos and molded it into a favorable outcome. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't pain or anger. It was hope. I wasn't just a wife waiting for her marriage to die. I was a client, a strategist, taking the first concrete step in demolishing a condemned structure to make way for a new life. Terrence was still basking in the glow of his secret affair, thinking he held all the cards. He had no idea I was already sitting at the table with an ace up my sleeve. Brenda Harrison's office was an elegant fortress of mahogany and leather, with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a stunning, panoramic view of the city, the same view I had from my living room, but from a different, more powerful angle. Brenda herself was even more formidable in person. She carried herself with an unhurried grace, but her eyes were like a surgeon's scalpel, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. There was a deep well of empathy in her gaze, but it was fortified with steel. This was not a woman who suffered fools. "So, Mrs. Covington," she began, her voice a smooth, confident alto after I had given her the broad strokes of my situation. "Tell me about the apartment." I took a deep breath. "Terrence bought it about a month after we got married. He makes significantly more than I do, so it was his money that paid the down payment. The mortgage payments come from his salary, and the deed is in his name only. He made a point of that. He called it his investment." Brenda listened, her fingers steepled under her chin. She didn't flinch. When I was done, a slow, knowing smile touched her lips. "And he thinks that means it belongs to him, and him alone." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "Yes," I confirmed. "He believes that what's his is his." She leaned forward, and her voice dropped slightly, taking on the tone of a teacher explaining a fundamental law of the universe to a favored student. "Mrs. Covington, Sainia, the state of Pennsylvania is an equitable distribution state. That is a very important term for you to remember. It means that any asset, any property, any increase in value of an asset acquired from the date you say "I do" to the date of final separation is classified as marital property. It doesn't matter whose name is on the deed. It doesn't matter whose paycheck paid for it. The law presumes that a marriage is a partnership and that both partners contribute to the acquisition of assets, whether that contribution is financial or domestic. Your support, your management of the home that has legal monetary value. I felt the floor beneath me solidify. The fear and uncertainty that had been my constant companions began to recede, replaced by a wave of incandescent rage and, strangely, empowerment. The home I had made, the life I had helped build, the law actually saw it. It saw me. So the apartment, I started, my voice trembling slightly. The apartment is just as much yours as it is his, Brenda finished, her eyes glinting. He may have paid for the bricks and mortar, but your contribution is woven into the very fabric of that home. A judge will see that. When this is over, he's not going to be asking you to leave. He's going to be writing you a check for half its current market value. She then laid out my mission with the clarity of a military general. I was to gather all financial documents I could find: bank statements, investment account summaries, pay stubs, tax returns from the past 2 years, and most critically, a copy of the deed to the apartment. Make copies of everything, she instructed, her voice firm. Digital copies stored somewhere you can't access, a new cloud account, a thumb drive you keep at a friend's house, and Sana. She leaned forward, her gaze pinning me. This is the most important part. You say nothing. You do nothing. You remain the calm, supportive wife. We do not move until he does. Let him be the one to detonate the bomb. Our job is to be standing safely outside the blast radius holding the insurance policy when he does. I walked out of that office, an hour later a different woman. I was no longer a victim of my husband's betrayal. I was the architect of his consequences. My home, the apartment I had so lovingly decorated, transformed into an intelligence theater. I was a spy in my own life, and my mission was to secure the evidence Brenda needed. Terrence's home office was his sanctuary, the one room in the apartment that was exclusively his territory. He kept it meticulously organized and was neurotically private about his paperwork, which was all conveniently located in a small, fireproof safe in his closet. Getting into that safe was the objective. My opportunity came on a Thursday night. Terrence had a weekly basketball game with friends from work, a sacred ritual that kept him out of the house for a guaranteed 3 hours. The moment I heard his car pull out of the garage, Operation Downfall was a go. My heart was a frantic hummingbird in my chest as I walked into his office. The room smelled of his cologne and ambition. I felt a pang of sadness for the man I thought he was, for the partnership I thought this room represented, but I pushed it down. Grief was a luxury for later. I found the safe tucked away behind a row of old college textbooks. It was a simple digital keypad model. My first guess was his birthday. Nothing. My second was our anniversary. The irony of that failure was not lost on me. I stood there, my mind racing. What numbers were important to him? What did he truly value? And then it hit me. Terrence wasn't a sentimental man. He was a practical one. He valued money, success. I keyed in the 6-digit closing date of the multi-million-dollar merger he had orchestrated last year, the one that had earned him a massive bonus. The safe clicked open. The breath I had been holding escaped in a shaky sigh. It was a sad, pathetic kind of victory. Inside was a treasure trove. Stacks of files, neatly labeled, bank statements, investment portfolios, tax returns, property deeds. It was the entire financial blueprint of our marriage. My hands trembled as I began the grim work. I laid each document on his desk and, using a scanning app on my phone, created a perfect digital copy. As the files uploaded to a new password-protected cloud account, the password being Miss Evelyn's warning, the full picture of his deceit came into focus. I saw the credit card statements, and the hotel rooms in Chicago he never told me about, the jewelry store purchases for items I had never received, the restaurant bills for intimate dinners for two. Here it was. In black and white, the cold, hard accounting of my husband's affair. Seeing the proof didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. The emotional wound had already turned into a scar. This was just data, ammunition for the battle to come. I finished just as his usual return time approached, placing every file back exactly as I had found it. I closed the safe, my hand steady now. When Terrence walked through the door 30 minutes later, flushed and sweaty from his game, I was on the sofa, reading my book, the picture of domestic tranquility. He grunted a hello and headed for the shower, completely oblivious to the fact that the woman he was so casually discarding had just secured the evidence that would dismantle his entire world. The trap was now baited and set. All I had to do was wait. And I am a very, very patient woman. The evidence is secured and the board is set. Sana has the knowledge and the proof, transforming her from a grieving wife into a silent predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Terrence continues his life of blissful arrogance, unaware that his every move is being watched and that his carefully built kingdom is about to be split in two. You have to keep watching, because the next chapter is when the walls begin to close in and his comfortable lies start to unravel. The weeks that followed my visit to Brenda Harrison's office were a masterclass in psychological warfare, waged in the high silence of our apartment. I moved through our life like a ghost of the wife I used to be. I made dinner. I kept the house immaculate. I smiled politely when he spoke to me. On the surface, I was serene. Beneath, I was a block of granite, patiently waiting for the inevitable erosion to reveal the strength within. Terrence, in his bottomless arrogance, interpreted my calm as weakness. He saw my lack of confrontation not as a strategy, but as surrender. And it made him reckless. The subtle signs of his infidelity became blatant, arrogant displays. He no longer bothered to leave the room to take hushed phone calls. He would stand by the window, his back to me, his voice a low, intimate murmur, punctuated by soft laughter that was never meant for me. The late nights became all-nighters, with lazy, almost insulting excuses texted the next morning. Fell asleep at a colleague's place after a late project. He started wearing a new expensive cologne, a scent I had never smelled before that clung to him like a shroud of his betrayal. He was marking his territory, and it was clear that territory was no longer our home. He was actively trying to provoke me, to push me into a hysterical outburst. He needed me to be the crazy, emotional wife to justify his own narrative. He needed a villain for the story he was telling himself and his new woman. One evening, I made coq au vin, a complex, slow-cooked dish he used to love. He poked at it with his fork, a disdainful sneer on his face. "This is a little heavy, don't you think, Sana?" he'd said, pushing the plate away. "My tastes are getting a little more refined lately." It was a deliberate cruelty, an attempt to chip away at my worth, to redefine our shared history as something provincial and unsophisticated that he had outgrown. I looked at him across the table, at this man who was a stranger to me now. I felt the familiar sting of hurt, but it was distant, like a memory of pain rather than a fresh wound. I simply met his gaze, my expression unreadable, and said, "I'm sorry you don't like it. I'll remember that for next time." Then I calmly finished my own meal. My refusal to engage, to give him the drama he so clearly craved, infuriated him. He stood up abruptly, the legs of his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm going out," he'd snapped, grabbing his keys. He expected a "where are you going?" or a tearful "why are you doing this?" He got neither. I just nodded and began clearing the table. The silence I offered him was not empty. It was full of my power, my knowledge, my patience, and it was driving him mad. Every day that I did not break was a day he moved closer to breaking himself. He was a man trying to start a fist fight with smoke, and his frustration was making him sloppy. On a quiet Saturday morning, while Terrence was at the gym for what was approaching 4 hours, my phone rang. It was Miss Evelyn. My heart gave a little jump. We spoke occasionally, but her calls were usually prompted by a birthday or a holiday. A random Saturday call was unusual. "Sana, child, how are you holding up?" she asked, her voice a familiar blend of warmth and gravelly wisdom. There was no preamble, no small talk about the weather. Miss Evelyn had a way of cutting straight to the bone. "I'm fine, Miss Evelyn. Just enjoying a quiet morning," I said, my own voice carefully neutral. I was not ready to show my hand, not even to her. She was silent for a moment, and I could picture her on the other end of the line, sitting in her armchair, her gaze sharp. "That boy of mine hasn't called me in 3 weeks," she said flatly. "He always calls his mother on Sundays." Something's wrong. It was a statement, not a question. She knew. Mothers always know. She was not calling to ask what was wrong with her son. She was calling to see what her son was doing to me. I took a breath, making a calculated decision. "Things have been a little difficult lately," I admitted, allowing a single carefully controlled crack in my calm facade. "Terrence has been working a lot. He seems distant." The sigh she let out was heavy with a lifetime of understanding her son's flaws. "Distant," she repeated, the word tasting like an old familiar disappointment. "That's one word for it." There was another pause, and then she spoke, her voice softening but losing none of its strength. "Sana, I'm going to tell you something my mother told me. You can't make a rooster stay in the hen house when he's determined to go crow on another fence, but you don't have to sit there and watch the empty perch. Either. You are not defined by that man's foolishness. Do you hear me?" "Yes, ma'am," I whispered, a lump forming in my throat. It was the first time I had felt a genuine urge to cry in weeks. Her validation was a balm on a wound I didn't even realize was still so raw. "You are a good, strong woman," she continued, her voice like a steel girder reinforcing my spine. "You are educated, you are kind, and you have a good heart. Don't you ever let any man, not even my own son, make you forget your worth. He is the one losing something precious, not you. You call me if you need anything, and I mean anything." We hung up a few minutes later, and I sat in the silent apartment feeling a profound sense of gratitude. She hadn't asked for details. She hadn't offered platitudes. She had given me exactly what I needed, an affirmation of my own strength and an unspoken promise of allegiance. She was siding with what was right, not with her own blood. Terrence believed his mother was his ultimate safety net, the one person who would always be in his corner. He had no idea that she was already standing in mine. Her words were another piece of armor, and I felt more prepared than ever for the final confrontation that was now barreling towards us. The final provocation, the act that signaled the beginning of the end, came 2 weeks later. Terrence announced he had to go on a mandatory corporate retreat in the Poconos for the entire weekend. The lie was so lazy, so transparently false, it was a profound act of disrespect. He delivered the news casually, not even looking up from his phone, as if my presence or opinion on the matter was utterly irrelevant. "It's a last-minute thing," he'd mumbled. "Team-building exercises. You know how it is." "I see," I said, my voice as smooth as glass. "When do you leave?" "Friday morning." "And hey," he said, finally looking at me, a flicker of something calculating in his eyes. "Could you pack my weekend bag for me? I'm going to be slammed with work all week." It was a power play, a deliberate act of demotion from partner to servant. He wasn't just having an affair. He was actively trying to diminish me, to reduce me to a functional object in his life before he discarded me completely. "Of course," I replied with a serene smile. "I'd be happy to." On Thursday evening, while he was in the shower, I packed his bag. I laid out his casual shirts, his designer jeans, a handsome cashmere sweater, and as I did, I saw his wallet lying on the dresser. Acting on an impulse I hadn't planned, I picked it up. Tucked into one of the side pockets was a receipt folded into a tiny square. It was from a high-end lingerie boutique downtown. The date was from 2 days prior. The purchase was for a silk chemise in a size small and a bottle of expensive massage oil. It was a receipt for a fantasy life with another woman, purchased with money from our joint account. I stared at the slip of paper, the clinical proof of his betrayal. There was no hot rush of anger. There was only a profound Arctic cold. I carefully folded the receipt and tucked it back into his wallet, exactly where I'd found it. Then I continued packing. I finished his bag, placing his toiletries neatly inside. On top of his clothes, I placed a copy of a biography I knew he'd been wanting to read. My final act as the thoughtful, caring wife. He left on Friday morning, giving me a perfunctory kiss on the cheek that felt like a brush of ice. He was a man escaping to his freedom, convinced he was leaving a clueless, docile fool behind. I stood at our magnificent floor-to-ceiling window and watched his car disappear into the stream of city traffic below. The silence he left behind was not lonely. It was potent. It was the deep, expectant quiet of a theater just before the curtain rises on the third act. I knew, with absolute certainty, that when he returned from this tryst, filled with the confidence of his deception, he would be ready to deliver his final speech, to end our marriage. He was coming home to fire me from the job of being his wife. He had no idea I was the one who owned the company. The stage is set. The final lie has been told. Sana stands alone in her apartment. Not as a victim, but as a queen on a chessboard, watching her opponent make his final fatal move. Terrence is about to return home to a reckoning he never saw coming. The confrontation that awaits him will be nothing like he imagined. Stay tuned, because in the next chapter, the storm finally breaks and the silence will be shattered by the sound of a kingdom falling. Terrence came home on Sunday evening just as the sun was setting, casting long, dramatic shadows across the city. He walked through the door with the self-important gravity of a man about to deliver a momentous speech. He had the nervous, restless energy of someone who had rehearsed his lines, a man who had cast himself as the powerful protagonist in the final act of a play. He was here to take control of his life, to sever ties, to be the decisive, conquering hero of his own story. He was so wrapped up in the narrative he'd created, he failed to notice that the set had been changed and his co-star had been given an entirely new script. He found me in the living room. I wasn't packing. I wasn't crying. I was sitting in the large armchair by the window, the city lights twinkling to life behind me like 1,000 expectant eyes. I had a glass of expensive Cabernet, a bottle from a case we had bought in Napa on a happier trip, and I was calmly watching him. My composure was his first unexpected obstacle. It threw him off. He had anticipated hysterics, pleading, a dramatic scene to validate his decision. My quiet, observant calm was a variable he hadn't accounted for, and it made him visibly uncomfortable. "Sana," he began, his voice a little too loud in the quiet room. He cleared his throat, stuffing his hands in his pockets. "We need to talk." "It seems we do," I replied, my voice even. I took a slow sip of my wine, my gaze never leaving his face. He began to pace, a caged animal charting the dimensions of his own trap. He launched into the speech I knew was coming, a pathetic medley of self-serving cliches. "I just haven't been happy for a long time," he said, staring at a point on the far wall, unable to meet my eyes. "I feel like we've grown apart. We want different things. This isn't easy for me to say, but I think this has run its course." He finally paused, taking a deep breath for the grand finale. "I've met someone, Sana. Someone who understands where I am in my life right now." He finally dared to look at me, expecting the words to land like a physical blow. When I didn't react, his arrogance swelled, mistaking my silence for shock. "So," he said, his tone shifting from regretful to businesslike, "I think it's best if we make this a clean break. I think it's time for you to pack your things and find a new place." He gestured vaguely around the magnificent apartment at the life I had built and curated. "Look, I bought this place. My name is on the deed. It was my money. I'll be generous, of course. I'll help you out with a deposit for a new apartment, give you a few weeks to get on your feet, but I need you to leave. I'm starting a new chapter, and I need this space." He delivered the lines with a finality that was meant to crush me, to leave me with no option but to scurry away, a casualty of his grand new life. He stood there, puffed up with his own perceived power and magnanimity, waiting for the tears. His words hung in the air, thick and toxic. The silence that followed stretched for an eternity, a vast, empty space where my predictable, heartbroken reaction was supposed to be. I could see him growing more and more unnerved as the seconds ticked by. He shifted his weight, his jaw tightening. He was a performer whose audience had forgotten to applaud, and then I began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle, a bubble of genuine, incredulous mirth that rose from deep within my chest. It was not the sound of hysteria or madness. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated amusement. The chuckle grew into a full, throaty laugh, rich and real. I tipped my head back and laughed at the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of this man. I laughed at the absurdity of his speech, at the years I had wasted believing in his facade, and at the glorious, beautiful, imminent collision of his ego with the brick wall of reality. My laughter echoed in the silent, expensive apartment, a sound of liberation that completely disarmed him. His face cycled through a series of emotions: confusion, irritation, and finally, a hot flush of indignant rage. "What the hell is so funny?" he snapped, his voice tight with fury. "Did you hear me? I am ending our marriage. I'm leaving you. Have you lost your mind?" I took a final deep breath, wiping a tear of mirth from the corner of my eye. I placed my wineglass down on the side table with a steady hand and looked at him. Truly looked at him, for the first time in months. My gaze was not filled with love or hate, but with a kind of clinical pity. "Oh, Terrence," I said, my voice as calm and cool as the evening air. "You really, truly have no idea, do you? You walk in here with your sad, little rehearsed speech, thinking you hold all the power, thinking you're the king of this castle." I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate. "You, the successful financial analyst, seem to have overlooked the most important asset in your portfolio. You overlook the law." I began to walk toward him, and he instinctively took a step back, a flicker of uncertainty, of fear in his eyes. "Let me give you a little free lesson in family law, since you clearly didn't do your homework," I continued, my voice the patient, clear tone of a lecturer. "In the state of Pennsylvania, we have a principle called equitable distribution. Do you know what that means? It means that any and all property acquired during a marriage is considered marital property. That includes income, investments, and yes, real estate." I stopped directly in front of him, forcing him to meet my gaze. "It does not matter," I said, enunciating each word with diamond-hard precision, "that your name is on the deed. It does not matter that your salary paid the mortgage. This apartment was purchased 1 month after our wedding day, which makes it under the law just as much mine as it is yours." I watched the color drain from his face, the confident smirk replaced by a slack-jawed expression of dawning horror. The king was beginning to realize his castle was made of sand. Terrence stared at me, his mind clearly scrambling to process the information, to find a flaw in the logic that was currently dismantling his entire plan. "You're lying," he stammered, his voice losing its confident timbre. "That's not how it works. I bought it. It's mine. My lawyer will—" "Your lawyer will tell you the exact same thing," I interrupted, my voice cutting through his blustering like a razor. "And I would know because I already have a lawyer. Her name is Brenda Harrison. They call her the Lioness. You might want to have your guy look her up. It will be an educational experience for him." His eyes widened, the mention of my own lawyer sending a visible shockwave through him. The hunter had just realized he was the one in the trap. "So, let's talk about how this is really going to work," I said, circling back to the armchair and picking up my wineglass, taking a final victorious sip. "You are correct about one thing. Our marriage is over. But you are very, very wrong about the logistics. I am not packing my things. I am not going anywhere. This is my home until a court of law says otherwise. I let that sink in before delivering the next blow. We have 2 options. We can sell this apartment and split the proceeds 50-50 right down the middle. Or if you are so attached to your space, you can buy me out. You can take out a loan for half of its current professionally appraised market value and pay me what you owe. Given the real estate market, that's a substantial amount of money. You might want to start running the numbers on that." I swirled the wine in my glass, watching him, his face a thunderous mask of impotent fury. "And Terrence," I added, my voice now laced with a cold, sharp edge. "You should probably call that woman with the red hair, the one you were with at the market last month. You should let her know that her moving in plans might be a bit premature. In fact," I tilted my head, feigning thoughtful consideration, "I imagine it will be quite difficult for you to afford the mortgage here, plus a new place for the 2 of you, plus the massive legal fees you're about to incur. Let's be honest, after the settlement, you'll be lucky to afford a studio apartment. How did you... he started, his voice a choked whisper. The safe... The safe? I smiled, a cold, sharp smile that didn't reach my eyes. The safe with the code from your big merger deal? Yes, I have copies, Terrence. Digital copies of everything. Every bank statement, every investment, every bonus, every credit card bill with every secret hotel room and gift you bought with our money. It's all marital property. It's all going to be divided. I set my glass down. The sound a sharp, final click in the silent room. So no, I will not be packing my bags. You have made this bed of lies, and now you will have to lie in it. Or, more accurately, you'll have to pay me for half of it. He stood there, utterly defeated, the architect of his own ruin. The power in the room had shifted so completely, so seismically, that the air itself felt different. He had walked in as a king ready to banish his queen. He was now nothing more than a prisoner in his own palace, and I was the one holding the keys. The tables have turned. The confrontation has ended not with tears, but with a devastating lesson in law and consequences. Terrence is trapped, his arrogance shattered, his perfect plan in ruins. But what will he do next? And how will the formidable Miss Evelyn react when she learns of her son's folly? The final chapter is about to unfold, where justice will be served and a new life will begin. You have to see how this ends. The aftermath of the confrontation was not a fiery explosion, but the eerie, ringing silence that follows one. Terrence was a man whose world had been hollowed out in the span of 10 minutes. He stood in the center of the living room, a statue of impotent rage, his face pale with shock. The king had been deposed, and he was struggling to comprehend the reality of his new status as a commoner in his own home. He tried to argue, to negotiate, to backtrack. He cycled through a pathetic Rolodex of tactics, from threats of legal ruin to sentimental appeals about the good times we'd had. "How could you do this, son?" he pleaded, his voice cracking with a self-pity that was nauseating. "I loved you. Couldn't we have just talked this out?" "The time for talking was before you bought another woman lingerie with our money, Terrence," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. I had already moved past the pain and into the logistical phase of the demolition. "All future communication will be through our lawyers. I suggest you find one first thing in the morning." Seeing his emotional appeals were useless, he did what he always did when faced with a problem he couldn't charm or bully his way out of. He called his mother. He stormed into our bedroom, slamming the door behind him, but the walls of our high-rise prison were not thick enough to contain the desperation in his voice. I could hear his side of the conversation clearly, a frantic, one-sided narrative of his own victimhood. "Mama, you won't believe what she's doing," he said, his voice high and strained. "She's trying to take everything. She's got some shark of a lawyer, Mo. She's being completely unreasonable, vindictive, after everything I've done for her. She's trying to take my apartment." I listened, a detached observer to his final pathetic attempt to rally his troops. He was painting me as the villain, the cold-hearted shrew, counting on a mother's unconditional loyalty to her son. There was a long pause, and I could faintly hear the low, rumbling timbre of Miss Evelyn's voice on the other end of the line. Terrence was silent, listening, and then his tone shifted. "What do you mean, what did I expect?" he demanded, his voice incredulous. "I'm your son. You're supposed to be on my side." Another pause, longer this time. I could picture Miss Evelyn, her face set like stone, delivering her verdict down the phone line. Terrence's next words were barely a whisper. "But, Mama..." He was silent for a full minute. When he spoke again, his voice was hollowed out, defeated. "Yeah, okay, I get it." He emerged from the bedroom a few minutes later, looking like a man who had been spiritually eviscerated. The last safety net he thought he had, his mother's unwavering support, had been yanked away, and he was in a free fall. He wouldn't look at me. He simply walked to the liquor cabinet, poured himself a large glass of whiskey, and slumped onto the sofa he now co-owned. The battle was over. The war had been won. He just hadn't realized he'd been fighting it alone. In the weeks that followed, Terrence's carefully constructed world unraveled with astonishing speed. The legal process began, and reality set in, delivered in the cold, formal language of his lawyer's emails. The apartment was professionally appraised, and its market value was even higher than I had anticipated. When Terrence saw the final number, the amount he would have to pay to buy me out, his arrogance finally completely crumbled, replaced by a bleak, panicked despair. His downfall was not confined to his finances. The news of his impending and very expensive divorce reached the ears of his new flame. I can only imagine the conversation. His clumsy attempts to explain that the lavish future he had promised her was now significantly downsized. The powerful, successful man who was trading up for a new life was suddenly revealed to be a soon-to-be divorced man with a massive new debt and significantly less disposable income. The red-haired woman's departure was apparently as swift as it was brutal. Terrence, in a moment of weakness or perhaps a last-ditch effort to garner sympathy, told his mother what happened, and his mother, in a moment of what I can only describe as poetic justice, told me. The woman had apparently laughed in his face. "Terry, honey, I was just having some fun," she had reportedly said. "You've got way too much drama for me. I'm not looking for a project." She was gone before the end of the week. The shiny new thing he had broken his marriage for was just as transactional and shallow as his own character. She hadn't been attracted to him. She had been attracted to the lifestyle he projected, a lifestyle that was now being legally divided. So Terrence was left utterly alone, in a home that no longer felt like his castle, but like a monument to his own stupidity. His mother, though she still spoke to him, was distant, her voice thick with a disappointment that was, for him, a fate worse than rage. He had lost his wife, he had lost his mistress, he had lost his mother's respect, and he was about to lose half of his net worth. He had flown too close to the sun on wings of ego and deceit, and now he was crashing back to earth with nothing to show for it but the bitter lesson of his own consequences. I felt no joy in his destruction, no vindictive pleasure. I simply felt the quiet, steady satisfaction of a balanced equation. His actions had finally met their equal and opposite reaction. 6 months later, the divorce was final. A check for a staggering amount had been wired to my bank account. The day the papers were signed, I packed the last of my personal belongings from the apartment. I could have fought to stay, but I had no desire to live in a mausoleum of a dead marriage. I was ready to build something new, a structure whose foundation was entirely my own. My new home was a beautiful, light-filled apartment in a historic brownstone in a different part of the city. It was smaller than the high-rise, but it felt infinitely larger. It was a space that was entirely mine, decorated not for show, but for my own comfort and joy. It was filled with books and art, with the scent of lemon and herbs from my kitchen, with the peaceful silence of a life lived on my own terms. A few weeks after I moved in, I met Miss Evelyn for lunch. She looked at me from across the table, her eyes clear and proud. "You look good, Sana," she said. "You look peaceful." "I am," I told her, and it was the honest truth. "That boy of mine," she sighed, shaking her head. "He's living in a small rental downtown. He had to sell the apartment to pay you out. He's miserable. But you know what? He needed this. You taught that boy a lesson about consequences that I should have taught him 30 years ago. You don't get to break good things and walk away with no scratches." She reached across the table and patted my hand. "I lost a daughter-in-law in this mess, but I feel like I gained a friend." Her words were a gift. Our bond, forged in the fires of her son's betrayal, was one of the unexpected treasures I had salvaged from the wreckage. That evening, I stood at the bay window of my new living room, looking out at the tree-lined street. The life I had thought I wanted, the one in the sky-high apartment with the charismatic, successful husband, had been a beautiful facade. A building with a rotten foundation. I had been its curator, its caretaker, but never its architect. Now, for the first time, I was the architect of my own life. I was drawing my own blueprints, choosing my own materials, and building something designed to last. The pain had been real, the betrayal profound, but what I had gained was infinitely more valuable than what I had lost. My freedom, my dignity, and the unshakable knowledge of my own worth. And that was a foundation that no man could ever break.